Hector's childhood sweetheart had made her come back. The Best Actress award at the film festival, the one I had fought so hard for, was handed away like a gift. Backstage at the awards ceremony, he came to find me. "What else do you want?" he asked softly. "I'll do my best to make it happen for you." I looked at the man I had loved for so many years, the man I had originally planned to propose to after winning this award. But now, all of a sudden, I wanted to give up. Chapter 1. Hector really didn't need to ask me that at all. He controlled the biggest entertainment company in the industry, with assets worth tens of billions. And for an award like this, one supposedly judged by acting skill, experience, and reputation alone, it was impossible for capital and influence to play no part whatsoever. So if he wanted to interfere, if he wanted to hand the Best Actress trophy to someone else, how could I possibly stop him? At that moment, he sat on the lounge sofa backstage. His head was slightly lowered, brows faintly furrowed, looking somewhat exhausted. "I know you prepared for this award for a long time," he said, "but Isolde needs it too. She needs the momentum." "Michelle." He tapped the armrest lightly with his index finger, his voice low and calm. "Consider this a grievance you had to suffer through. What kind of compensation do you want instead? I'll do everything I can to make it up to you." So, he didn't know how much this award meant to me after all. For more than an entire year, I left early and returned late every day on set to immerse myself in the role. I insisted on doing my own stunt work. During several cliffside scenes, the rigging malfunctioned. I was left hanging midair for hours and nearly died in an accident. Back when my life was hanging by a thread, the person I thought of was him. I thought, "Hector, I have to win this award. I have to stand at the very top. I want everyone to know me, to know that I'm worthy of you, worthy of standing beside you." But now, all that determination suddenly drained away. My gaze drifted outside, and I suddenly remembered the assistant who had been fired after missing Hector's work messages because he stayed up for days dealing with his mother's death. Just a fresh graduate. He had even come to the villa this morning looking for Hector. He looked pitiful. As for me, there was nothing else I really wanted anymore. So I said, "Give that assistant another chance. He really needs this job." And he promised he'd never make the same mistake again. Didn't he? Chapter 2. Hector seemed startled for a moment. He stood up and walked toward me. His brows tightened even more. "That's all you want?" He paused. After hesitating briefly, he looked straight at me, his tone far from pleasant. "This is the first time I've realized you enjoy helping people so much. Michelle, is there really nothing else you want to say?" "Something else?" Subconsciously, I lowered my head. I was wearing a custom haute couture gown that I had finally managed to borrow from a luxury fashion house. But now it seemed completely pointless. On the ring finger of my right hand was still the platinum couple's ring Hector and I had bought together years ago. But from beginning to end, I was the only one foolishly wearing it like a lovesick simp. By now, it was time to wake up from the dream. "Michelle, the two of you were never from the same world." I took the ring off, placed it gently on the table and said softly, Hector, thank you for taking care of me all these years. But from now on, we should walk separate paths." Chapter 3. The lounge was private. Only Hector and I were there. His expression darkened instantly. He suddenly looked stern and oppressive, his whole presence heavy with tension. For a long time, he said nothing. He simply stared at me in silence. Years of standing at the top had made it impossible for a man like him to lower himself to coax me or comfort me. After a while, he finally spoke in a flat tone. "You've thought this through? Over an award like this?" I nodded. "Yes, over this award." A cold laugh came from above me. "Fine, Michelle." He strode out without looking back. "Keep the ring or throw it away. I don't care. It's only worth a few $1,000s. Hector, am not short on that kind of money." Chapter 4. It was true. Hector and I had been together for 7 years. He had always been a generous boyfriend. Luxury brands, jewelry, sports cars, even houses. He never treated me poorly when it came to material things. Only this pair of rings was something I had asked him for myself. Back then, I had just graduated from film school. I was a complete rookie in the entertainment industry. No resources, no connections, no powerful background. Other than a pretty face, I had practically nothing. The boss of the company I had just signed with brought me to a high society banquet filled with influential elites. Pointing at those powerful people, he told me, "Michelle, as long as you can latch on to any one of them, you'll never have to worry about roles or resources again." Then he pushed me into the crowd. Very quickly, a bloated middle-aged businessman in his 50s started walking toward me. Instinctively, I stepped backward. The crowd pressed tightly around me, and suddenly, a thought appeared in my mind. If there really had to be someone like that, then at the very least, couldn't it be someone younger and better looking? So in the next second, I did the boldest and most reckless thing I had ever done in my life. I deliberately spilled my drink onto Hector as he walked past me, then grabbed his sleeve tightly. "Can you take me out of here?" Later, Hector told me, it wasn't like women had never thrown themselves at him before, but I was probably the dumbest and most ridiculous one of them all. At that time, I was young and inexperienced. I understood nothing. I spent 7 years with Hector. For the first 4 of those years, our relationship was never made public. But even as a secret lover, I still threw all my feelings and devotion into him without holding anything back. One year on my birthday, he asked me what I wanted. We had just finished lunch at a shopping mall. I dragged him into a local jewelry store and picked out a simple platinum couple's ring that wasn't eye-catching at all. When I carefully slipped the ring onto my finger, Hector casually tossed his own ring box into his coat pocket. He glanced at me indifferently. "Michelle, this kind of thing means nothing. You know that, right?" Chapter 5. I wore that ring for 7 years, but I never once saw Hector wear his. Until 4 years later, a television drama I starred in became a massive hit. Overnight, I gained millions of followers on Weibo and other social media platforms. Even paparazzi started following me around for photos. After days of non-stop media exposure, one picture leaked online. It was a photo of me leaving Hector's villa. Public opinion exploded instantly. Hector's family was far too powerful, and he himself had always been extremely low profile. But this time, Hector didn't have his people suppress the trending topics. Instead, he briefly announced our relationship on his private social feed. A lot of people said I was unbelievably lucky, that I had somehow managed to cling to a billionaire's coattails. Others said Hector was just fooling around, that a little actress like me was nothing more than a temporary toy. And once he got bored, he'd toss me aside. I ignored every single comment from the outside world. I only looked at the ring on my left hand. Back then, I foolishly indulged in a fantasy. Maybe because I had finally gained some fame, Hector was willing to acknowledge my existence. Then what if I became even more successful? If I became a Best Actress winner, a celebrated actress admired by everyone, would we get married then? Looking back now, that thought was painfully childish. Maybe no matter how hard I tried, in Hector's eyes, I was still completely worthless. I smiled faintly, then picked up my phone and called my manager. "Where are you? Can you come pick me up right now? I want to go to the airport." Chapter 6. Go where? The airport? "Michelle, are you drunk? The award ceremony starts in less than an hour, and now you're telling me you want to leave?" The shrill voice on the other end of the call practically exploded through the speaker, forcing me to hold the phone farther away from my ear. A few years ago, after starring in several well-received films, I had gradually established myself in the entertainment industry. So when my contract expired, I chose not to renew with my old company. Instead, I opened my own studio. My current manager was a senior from one of my university clubs. We had known each other for years and were basically best friends. She had a terrible temper, but she genuinely cared about me in every possible way. The moment she heard I was about to quit everything, she immediately started analyzing the pros and cons for me. "Did you run into your old haters again? Or did you fight with someone? Just endure it for now, my little princess." A few days ago, I met with several media outlets and film critics. Everyone unanimously agreed your performance this time was incredible. Maybe not 100%, but conservatively speaking, there's at least a 95% chance you'll win Best Actress. 95%? I lifted my head, then laughed bitterly at myself. Getting praise from those notoriously harsh and nitpicky film critics really was beyond my expectations. But what did it matter? I had fought with everything I had to climb to where I was today. And yet all it took was one sentence from Hector to completely erase every bit of effort I had poured into this past year. You won't get it. I closed my eyes and spoke softly. I'm not winning Best Actress anymore. He already gave the award to Isolde. Chapter 7. I didn't hear clearly what my friend shouted over the phone after that, but it sounded like she cursed quite viciously. Less than half an hour later, she arrived. Outside the venue, reporters and media crews had already swarmed the area. I couldn't even imagine how much effort it took for her to get a pass and squeeze her way into my lounge. Then the moment she saw me, she pulled me into a tight hug, holding me firmly in her arms while repeatedly comforting me. It's okay, Michelle. To hell with that stupid award. If they don't want to give it to you, then screw them. Come on. We're leaving. We're not staying in this trash place just to get bullied. She grabbed my wrist and led me through a staff-only passageway she had somehow managed to arrange, so we don't end up surrounded by those reporters later after you don't win and get humiliated for no reason. I looked at my best friend, and the cold emptiness in my heart unexpectedly warmed a little. See? There will always be someone who stands by your side unconditionally. She kept ranting the entire way, cursing everyone from Hector to the organizers, from entertainment companies to the media reporters, sparing absolutely no one. By the time we escaped the security perimeter and quietly got into the car, her hands were already gripping the steering wheel. The car shot forward abruptly. Only then did she suddenly remember something and turn to look at me. Wait, where were you trying to go again? Isn't the airport a little too much? Don't tell me you already bought the ticket? I took a deep breath, then nodded. Yeah, Norway. Chapter 8. After everything that had already happened tonight, my friend handled the news much better this time. At the very least, she didn't slam the brakes in the middle of the road. She merely let out an awkward glanced sideways at me, and tapped her fingers against the steering wheel, trying hard to suppress her temper while waiting for my explanation. I lowered my head and took out my phone from my handbag, opening my email inbox. I pulled up the newly received film collaboration offer and handed it to her. A new movie is about to start filming. It just happens to be there. The schedule's really tight, so they contacted me directly. The script is pretty good. Later, I'll have them contact you to finalize the contract details. At the bottom of the invitation letter, the sender's name was displayed clearly. Arthur. Chapter 9. Arthur. Back when I was still studying at film school, I had already heard of him, a genius director who became famous at a young age. At 17, he shot his very first short film and won an international award with it. People said he was demanding, serious, arrogant, and full of eccentric habits. For example, he never worked with established stars who had already won mainstream awards. Instead, he preferred young, unknown actors. According to him, those actors had greater potential and were more challenging to shape, even though filming with them was far more difficult. Without exception, every project Arthur touched became a crushing success, whether in critical acclaim or box office performance. And actually, a few years ago, Arthur had contacted me too. I still remembered how I felt the first time I received his collaboration offer in my inbox. This was the most talented and famous director currently recognized in the industry. If I could receive guidance from him, how much would my acting improve? I went to Hector immediately and was so excited that he became the first person I told. I had assumed that even if he wouldn't be as thrilled as I was, at the very least he would be happy for me, but his reaction was extremely cold. He stared at me quietly, seeming almost to let out a sneer, then slowly said, word by word, Arthur? You're not going, unless you plan to give up every other resource in your career from now on. Michelle. Chapter 10. I turned down Arthur's offer. Only later did I hear people mention that the relationship between those two men was far more complicated than I had imagined. When Hector was 5 or 6 years old, his parents divorced. His mother was a dancer. A few years later, she remarried Arthur's widowed father and became Arthur's stepmother. After the marriage, she never had another child. Instead, she devoted herself entirely to raising her stepson. As for her biological son, Hector's mother never once went back to see him. It was like she completely cut ties with him. The person chatting with me shook their head and sighed, then gave me a meaningful look. So now you understand how much he hates Arthur, right? If you want to stay by Hector's side, then you'd better keep your distance from anyone he can't stand. So that was the reason. After rejecting Arthur that time, I deliberately began avoiding him. For years, the two of us never had another opportunity to meet. But what I didn't expect was, 2 weeks before this awards ceremony, I would receive another collaboration email from Arthur's studio. The email wasn't long, only a few hundred words. It roughly explained that they were about to begin filming a new movie. The project was still in the preparation stage, so nothing had been announced publicly yet. The female lead happened to match my image perfectly, and if possible, they sincerely hoped we could work together. At the very bottom was Arthur's private phone number and WeChat contact. I had heard the rumors before that Arthur disliked casting actors who had already won mainstream awards. So if I signed this contract before the film festival ceremony, it might be our final chance to ever work together. I reread that email several times, then lifted my head and stared out at the night sky. It felt like I was standing at a crossroads. Hector on the left, my career on the right. I took a deep breath, and that time, I gave up my last opportunity once again. Until today, 1 hour before the awards ceremony began, Hector came to me and said he was taking away my award. At the moment when my future felt the most uncertain and hopeless, I sent Arthur a text message. He replied almost immediately, "You are the most suitable person for the female lead role. Svalbard, Norway. I can have my assistant help you book the flight." Chapter 11. When Isolde won the Best Actress award, Hector was seated in the front row. The moment the host announced the winner, the atmosphere in the venue seemed to freeze for a brief second. Only afterward did applause gradually begin to spread through the crowd. Polite and restrained, Hector lifted his eyes. He watched the childhood sweetheart he had grown up with standing on stage, crying uncontrollably as she thanked this person and that person before finally mentioning his name. Right on cue, the camera swept toward him, and at that exact moment, for some reason, he suddenly thought of Michelle. If she had been the one winning today, what kind of expression would she have worn? Would she cry too? Or would she smile, hug someone, feel relieved? And in her acceptance speech, would his name have appeared in it? Almost unconsciously, he turned around to look. In the second row, at the seat the organizers had reserved for Michelle, there was only a nameplate with her name on it. The seat was empty. No one was there. She was gone. Chapter 12. If you really thought about it, the one Hector truly owed was Isolde. 20 years ago, Hector's mother left, and afterward, his father threw himself entirely into work, caring about nothing else. He was just a child then, with no relatives by his side. In the end, he was taken in by Isolde's family. From elementary school through middle school, there weren't many people his age around him. Only Isolde, who was a few years younger. Because the elders in her family treated him like their own son, he also treated Isolde like a little sister, indulging countless unreasonable requests and spoiling her endlessly. But later, he met Michelle, and Isolde went abroad to study acting. The two of them almost completely lost contact after that. Until this time, she had set her sights on the award and called him personally, begging him to give it to her. Hector held his phone in silence. He remembered how hard Michelle had worked for this. So after a pause, he tried persuading Isolde instead. If you don't have the ability, then even if you get the award, the public still won't acknowledge you. But Isolde shook her head, her voice soft and pleading as she begged him over and over again. Please, Ashing, you said before that whatever I wanted, you'd help me get it. You're not seriously going to value romance over friendship, right? Don't tell me getting a girlfriend made you forget the bond we shared growing up. Chapter 13. Hector had been right. The public and media response to Isolde winning Best Actress was overwhelmingly negative. Topics like hashtag Isolde undeserved Best Actress hashtag awards ceremony rigged hashtag, and hashtag give Michelle her real Best Actress title back hashtag had dominated trending searches for days. The internet was practically drowning in outrage. Damn, what the hell was Isolde's acting? It was an absolute mess. Please. Michelle's film was literally the only worthy nominee this year, okay? What kind of trash film festival is this? And they still call themselves authoritative? They should just shut down already. That award was obviously bought. You people used to spread rumors that Michelle's billionaire boyfriend was some CEO or whatever. But even with all that power, he never rigged anything for her before. Michelle got where she is today entirely through her own talent. Hector scrolled through the comments one by one. Actually, if he really wanted to, all it would take was some money and a few orders to suppress the backlash. But for some reason, he didn't do it. Ever since their unpleasant argument that night, Michelle had completely disappeared. It wasn't like they had never fought before, but almost every single time, Michelle was always the first to lower her head and make peace. This was the longest they had ever gone. More than a week had passed, and she hadn't contacted him once. Later, Hector even had his assistant call her, but none of the calls could get through. He took the ring Michelle had left behind in the lounge out of his pocket, rubbing it slowly between his fingers, and suddenly, an unfamiliar sense of panic and restlessness began spreading through his chest. When exactly was she coming back? She wouldn't really never come home again, right? And it was at that moment. 2 knocks sounded from outside the office. The assistant walked in carrying a document envelope. Lowering his head slightly, he spoke softly. It's about Michelle. We managed to find some information. Chapter 14. Hector abruptly raised his head and glanced at the assistant. A university graduate barely in his 20s. Just a few days ago, he had made a mistake and had already gone through the termination process, only to be saved because of a single sentence from Michelle. The assistant pulled several photographs out of the envelope and placed them in front of Hector. The images were blurry, clearly taken by paparazzi. The background was a snow-covered glacier. A tall, slender young man had wrapped an arm around Michelle's shoulders, shielding her from the cameras with his own body. Even in the dim night, Hector recognized him instantly. Arthur, the person he had hated for so many years, the person who had stolen his mother away from him. It felt as though something exploded violently beside his ears. His fingers began trembling uncontrollably. The assistant paused briefly before continuing. We already bought all the photos. A paparazzo took them. The location was a small town in northern Norway. Hector pressed one hand against the desk as he slowly stood up. Then he let out a cold laugh. Good. Arrange my schedule immediately. I'm leaving tonight. Chapter 15. The moment I walked out of the airport, I spotted Arthur immediately. I hadn't expected a director like him to personally come pick me up. Spring in Norway was still freezing cold. The coat I was wearing clearly wasn't thick enough. As he started the engine, he handed me an unopened down jacket. The place we're heading to is called Longyearbyen. It's about a dozen hours drive from here. It's a small town. Only a few thousand people live there. Very quiet, and the nights are long. As he spoke, Arthur suddenly turned to look at me. Have you read the script yet? I nodded quickly. During the flight, I had already read the entire script carefully from beginning to end. He smiled. His voice was deep, yet gentle. Then he started discussing the character with me. And suddenly, I realized Arthur wasn't quite like the rumors described at all. People always said he was quiet and reserved, a cold workaholic obsessed with filmmaking. But I tilted my head slightly, and secretly glanced at him again. Ever since we met, the smile on his face had never disappeared. It was as if something deep inside him made him genuinely happy. The corners of his eyes curved softly upward, and a faint blush lingered on his cheeks. He actually looked incredibly gentle. Chapter 16. Arthur told me Longyearbyen was the city closest to the North Pole. The movie contained many scenes involving eruptions of the Aurora Borealis, so they had chosen this location specifically. He had consulted the meteorological station. The next month would be the peak season for aurora activity, which meant we had to seize the opportunity. So I barely rested at all. Very quickly, I threw myself into filming. This movie was considered an art house film. There weren't many actors, and many of them were foreigners. My spoken English wasn't particularly good. So after several days, the person I interacted with most naturally became Arthur. And he never once found me annoying. Every time I asked him questions, he patiently explained the acting approach to me over and over again. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, until the accident happened. Someone had apparently leaked details of our filming schedule to the media. Near dusk, just as filming was about to wrap up for the day, several paparazzi suddenly rushed toward us in small vans. Some of them held cameras, flashes firing non-stop. While taking pictures, they shouted loudly, "Mr. Arthur, is this the movie you've been preparing for all these years? Could the female lead introduce herself to us? She actually looks kind of familiar." "Me, Michelle? The Michelle who just lost the Best Actress award again? Michelle, would you mind accepting an interview?" I think I heard Arthur curse under his breath. He immediately took off his coat and draped it over my shoulders, then wrapped one arm protectively around me, leading me toward his Range Rover. He turned back and shot the reporters a razor-sharp glare. "Get the hell out of here. Don't make trouble." Chapter 17. It was the first time I had ever heard Arthur speak in such a cold, impatient tone. So when facing other people, he could be this harsh too. He drove incredibly fast. The tabloid paparazzi had probably stumbled onto the biggest scoop they'd had in ages, so they chased after us relentlessly in their vans. But after only 2 intersections, Arthur had already shaken them off. One hand on the steering wheel, he glanced at the rearview mirror, then looked at me. "There's only one hotel in this town, and there are probably reporters waiting there already. We can't go back. I still have an apartment here, though it's a little small, so you might have to put up with it for a while." Michelle. It was a detached apartment near the edge of the town. The place was tiny, and there weren't many nearby residents, but the scenery outside was beautiful. The moment you opened the window, you could see the ocean and the endless blue sky stretching into the distance. I honestly couldn't understand why Arthur would buy a house in such a remote country. He seemed to notice my confusion. Smiling faintly, he explained, "My mother and father picked this place when they traveled here together." My mother was a dancer. She said places with extreme cold inspired her creativity. I froze for a moment. Only after several seconds did I realize the mother he was referring to was probably the woman who married into his family later. His stepmother. Whenever he spoke about her, Arthur's expression carried deep respect. "Ms. Wendy isn't my biological mother, but she's always treated me very well. When she was younger, she performed in musicals. Maybe you two would have a lot in common." He glanced at me. "Michelle, my mother's flight arrives in a couple of days. She said she wants to visit the set. I'll introduce you to her." Chapter 18. The paparazzi didn't manage to follow us here, but the apartment really was tiny. So tiny that there was only one bedroom, and only one bed inside it. The moment we entered, Arthur immediately pulled blankets and sheets from the closet and began hurriedly tidying the place up, scratching the bridge of his nose awkwardly. He seemed a little embarrassed. "Michelle, you can sleep on the bed. I'll stay on the floor. The company has already started handling the reporter situation. Things should probably return to normal tomorrow." At first, I wanted to politely refuse, but after everything lately, the award ceremony, the day and night-long flight, non-stop filming, working through exhaustion, and today's escape from the paparazzi, my body was already reaching its limit. My head felt dizzy, my legs suddenly weakened, and before I realized it, I had collapsed backward onto the bed. Arthur froze. Then he hurried over to me and placed a hand against my forehead. His palm was cool against my burning skin, and instantly, I felt a little better. He let out a soft sigh. "Michelle, you have a fever." Chapter 19. That entire night, Arthur barely slept. He searched through the apartment cabinets for a medicine kit, and inside, there actually were remedies for fever and colds. Only, they were traditional herbal medicines. So for the whole night, he stayed in the kitchen brewing medicine. While tending the pot, he kept coming back every so often to check on me. Curled beneath the blankets, I watched him moving back and forth, and in my feverish haze, I suddenly remembered the time I spent with Hector. There had been a period when he was under tremendous pressure. Someone had apparently targeted his company and submitted stacks of accusation letters to higher-level prosecutors. For weeks, officials came constantly to investigate. He was overwhelmed dealing with it all and barely slept more than a few hours each night. Eventually, his body finally gave out, and he ended up hospitalized. When I heard the news, I was attending an event overseas. In the end, I canceled the business dinner scheduled for the next day and immediately boarded a red-eye flight back, traveling more than 10 exhausting hours overnight. By the time I drove to the hospital, Hector was still asleep in his VIP ward. Actually, I knew there wasn't much I could do for him. But at that moment, I only thought one thing. What if? What if, when he woke up, he wanted to see someone familiar beside him? Later, Hector opened his eyes. I was sitting next to the bed, peeling an apple. The moment he saw me, he seemed stunned for a brief second. Even now, I still remembered the expression on his face back then. Cold, detached, completely devoid of surprise. If anything, he almost looked tired of me. Why did you bother rushing back? After a pause, he curled his lips faintly. Michelle, you don't actually love me, do you? The teasing indifference in his expression felt like another reminder. No matter how much of my heart I poured into him, our ending would never change. Burning with fever, drifting in and out of consciousness, I seemed to confuse the past with the present, and before I realized it, I repeated the exact same words Hector once said to me. You don't actually love me, do you? The moment the words left my mouth, I froze. Only then did I realize what I had just said. My voice hadn't been loud, but Arthur definitely heard it. He stood at the kitchen doorway, still holding the freshly brewed herbal medicine, staring at me blankly. Even the tips of his ears had turned red. His mouth opened, then closed again. Why you? How could you? Chapter 20. The atmosphere became unbearably awkward. I immediately sat upright and hurriedly waved my hands, trying to explain. But before I could say anything, a sudden pounding came from outside the door. Again, and again, heavy and urgent, as if something extremely important had happened. Arthur frowned instantly, his expression turning serious. It was the middle of the night. This place was remote. If it wasn't reporters outside, then it could be something dangerous. During the few minutes we hesitated, the knocking grew even louder, almost violent now, as though someone were using all their strength to smash the door down. It sounded like the next second, they might force their way inside. Arthur walked toward the entrance. He glanced back at me and pointed behind himself. There's a hunting rifle under that cabinet. You'll see it once you open it. If we need it later, just toss it to me. Then he opened the door, and standing beneath the heavy darkness of the Arctic night, was Hector, his eyes bloodshot, his entire body carrying the exhaustion of a long journey. Chapter 21. At first, Arthur thought the person outside was a reporter who had somehow gotten wind of their location. Or worse, a drifter, a beggar, maybe even a robber. As for Hector, it wasn't as if Arthur didn't know about his relationship with Michelle. But Arthur also knew exactly what kind of man Hector was. Arrogant, prideful, a man incapable of truly making room in his heart for anyone else. The moment Michelle failed to appear at the awards ceremony, Arthur had already begun harboring hope. He was gambling that Michelle and Hector could never return to how they once were. But he never expected Hector to come here, after more than 10 hours on a private jet, crossing half the globe overnight. His shirt was wrinkled, and faint mist still clung to his overcoat from the freezing night air. He strode inside, and immediately saw me wrapped in a blanket. There was only one bed in the apartment. The heating was turned up high, and with my fever still burning, I was wearing nothing more than a thin inner shirt with the collar hanging loose. No one spoke, but it was obvious Hector had misunderstood. He froze where he stood for several seconds, his face filled with confusion, as if he couldn't process what he was seeing. Then, in the next instant, he suddenly lunged forward, grabbing Arthur by the collar and slamming him toward the ground. While cursing furiously, he threw punch after punch. Who the hell do you think you are? I knew from the very beginning that you had ulterior motives. Ever since the first time you met Michelle, your eyes never left her. If I hadn't stopped it, wouldn't you have confessed to her a long time ago? I stared at Arthur in shock. He had been staying up late filming these past few days, and tonight he had spent the entire night taking care of me while I was sick. He hadn't rested at all. How could he possibly match Hector physically? And yet, Arthur looked as though he had already given up resisting. Leaning crookedly against the cabinet, he tugged at the corner of his lips and let out a cold laugh. You're right. I've liked her for a very long time. Hector, are you this furious because Michelle doesn't want you anymore? And that sneer seemed to completely ignite Hector's rage. He stared at Arthur with bloodshot eyes, his face openly twisted with hatred and resentment, as though the person before him was his greatest enemy in life. Then he said, "Arthur, why don't you just die? Why do you always love stealing what belongs to me?" I had absolutely no doubt that if nobody stopped him, Hector would keep beating Arthur endlessly. And suddenly, I remembered what Arthur had said earlier. I grabbed the hunting rifle from beneath the cabinet, then pressed the cold black barrel against Hector's shoulder. Taking a deep breath, I said, "Hector, get out." Chapter 22. Even now, I still remembered the expression Hector gave me at that moment. Disheveled, disbelieving. I had chased after him for far too long, so long that he simply could not believe that one day I could stand against him because of another man. He lowered his gaze halfway, then slowly grasped the barrel of the rifle, rubbing his fingers across it as he gently pushed it downward. "You don't need to point a gun at me." For the first time, there was a trace of loneliness in Hector's voice. "My pride isn't that shameless. If you want me gone, would I really stay and force myself on you?" Bang! The apartment door slammed shut violently. I rubbed the tip of my nose awkwardly and turned around. Walking over to Arthur, I bent down, trying to help him up from the floor, perhaps because he remembered what he had just confessed. Arthur looked unusually nervous when he met my eyes. He quickly turned his face away, then picked up the herbal medicine he had just finished brewing. Coughing lightly twice, he muttered, "Drink this first. As for everything else, well, we can talk about it slowly." Slowly, as I lay back down wrapped in the blanket, one thought drifted through my mind. Hector was still here, and the unfinished story between him and me. It was time to finally end it properly. Chapter 23. Arthur's herbal medicine really worked. After drinking it, I slept incredibly well. I didn't wake up until nearly noon the next day. The moment I opened my eyes, I discovered Arthur still wearing his overcoat, asleep beside my bed with his head resting against the mattress. He must have been exhausted. His hair was messy, his lips pressed tightly together, as if he were trapped in some uneasy dream. I gently smoothed the crease between his brows. Without waking him, I quietly picked up my coat, then opened the apartment door and stepped outside. After turning the corner, I saw Hector. He was leaning against a cullinan, a cigarette between his fingers. Cigarette butts scattered all over the ground beneath him. In just a single night, faint bluish stubble had already appeared along his jawline. Hearing my footsteps, Hector slowly lifted his head. I said softly, "Hector, let's talk." His voice was hoarse. "Okay." Chapter 24. There was a park nearby. I walked a short distance, found a bench, wrapped my coat tighter around myself, and sat down. After a full night's rest, my fever had gone away, but Hector seemed to have become sick instead. A street vendor was wandering nearby, so he went over and bought a hot drink before handing it to me. And when his hand extended toward me, even though I didn't want to notice it, I still saw it immediately. The platinum ring on his finger, the matching couple's ring I had begged him to buy all those years ago. 7 years. And this was the very first time he had ever worn it. I froze briefly, then sighed softly and turned my head away. What's the point now? I already threw mine away. Hector, you know some things can never go back once they're broken. He stared at me intensely, his Adam's apple bobbing, maybe because of the cold. His voice seemed to choke slightly, carrying the faintest trace of tears. It wasn't thrown away. He hurriedly pulled the red velvet ring box from his coat pocket, his fingers trembling lightly. I went back to the lounge and picked it up again. This ring is proof of our 7 years together. How could you just throw it away? I'll put it back on you right now. Almost like he had become possessed. He kept repeating the words under his breath while grabbing my hand. Once you wear it again, we'll go back and get married. We'll never separate for the rest of our lives. People always said Hector had taken control of the company while still young, that he was calm, calculating, and impossibly composed. But right now, he looked nothing like that. Instead, he seemed like an inexperienced young man for the very first time. Uneasy, panicked, desperate. His eyes were red as he gripped my wrist tightly, as though if he held on hard enough, I would still be the same Michelle from before, the Michelle who always followed behind him. But when he lifted his head and saw the disgust and coldness in my eyes, something inside Hector finally shattered. Don't look at me like that, Michelle. I know you wanted to marry me after winning Best Actress. Just think of it as something I owe you, okay? Chapter 25. Hector still refused to release my wrist. I had no doubt that with how much stronger he was than me, he could drag me away by force if he wanted to. So 10 minutes earlier, I had secretly sent Arthur my location. And now, he arrived in his car. In a rush, he immediately stepped forward and pulled Hector away from me. The moment Hector saw Arthur, his expression darkened instantly. After a pause, he snapped angrily. Are you done yet? This is between Michelle and me. Do you want another beating? But just as the words left his mouth, a woman wearing high heels stepped out of Arthur's car. Her tone wasn't loud, yet the instant Hector heard her voice, he froze completely in place. Hector, long time no see. Chapter 26. MS. Wendy, a nationally renowned dancer. Although I had never met her in person before, I had seen countless photographs of her in newspapers and magazines. She should already be in her 50s. Yet her figure and appearance were maintained beautifully. Every movement she made carried elegance and refinement, the very image of a classical beauty. When she first debuted, she studied under legendary masters and won award after award. But at some point, people became more interested in discussing her scandals instead, marrying into a wealthy family, then divorcing cleanly and decisively, never even looking back at her child again. For more than a decade, whenever people wanted to attack her, they always used this against her. Heartless, cold-blooded, cruel. But when a woman is pushed to that point, whoever stops to think about what she herself had gone through? I turned to look at Hector. Both of his hands were clenched tightly into fists. His body leaned forward slightly in disbelief. His lips moved faintly. His voice was soft. But in the silence of that early morning, everyone could still hear him clearly. He murmured under his breath, "Mom." Chapter 27. Wendy shook her head gently. You'd better not call me that anymore. I only happened to pass by today. I don't know what happened between you young people, but... Her gaze seemed to drift briefly toward me. Hector, a relationship only works when both people are willing. Ask Michelle yourself. Does she still want to be with you? Everyone's eyes turned toward me, perhaps because of his mother's presence. Hector finally released my wrist. He frowned tightly, almost pleading as he slowly spoke my name, Michelle. But this time, I ignored him completely. Instead, I walked straight toward Wendy and wrapped my arm around the arm of this woman who had clearly endured far too much in life. She looked at me, then gently patted my shoulder with a faint smile. Good. Since you've made your decision, then let's go home. As we walked toward Arthur's car, a cold breeze swept through the air, and behind us, I suddenly heard Hector let out a furious roar. It was filled with hatred, unwillingness, and pain. But the person he was calling out to wasn't me. It was the mother who had left him more than 10 years ago. I already admitted I was wrong. Why still won't you forgive me? You abandoned me for so many years, and now that someone finally loves me, you're going to take her away too? Mom. Mom. Mom, why do you hate me so much? Why? He cried. I never turned around. Neither did Wendy, because both of us understood. Some things, once broken, can never truly be repaired again. Chapter 28. After getting out of the car and returning to the tiny apartment, Wendy stopped me, saying she wanted to talk a little longer. She brought up the small house. Back when Arthur's father and I traveled to Norway together, I casually mentioned that I liked this place on a whim. It was honestly just an offhand comment, but he took it seriously. Right after dinner, he brought me to meet the owner and transferred the property. She tilted her head slightly toward me and blinked playfully. Actually, Arthur is a lot like his father. He's a very gentle young man. Anne, he's liked you for a very long time. I froze. Really? Although I had already heard something similar from Hector during their fight earlier, because Arthur and I had interacted so little in the past, the words still didn't feel entirely real to me. Wendy nodded. Yes. He collected every magazine and photo shoot you've had since your debut. But at the time, you had just started dating Hector. And considering the relationship between those two, there probably wasn't any way for him to interfere. Still, I think if he had known you and Hector wouldn't last in the end, he probably wouldn't have waited until today to make a move. Chapter 29. Wendy said she wanted to explore other parts of the town. Before leaving, she repeated the exact same words she had spoken earlier in front of Hector. A relationship only works when both people are willing. Michelle, although I think Arthur is a good man, the final decision is still yours. I walked back toward the apartment alone. The moment I lifted my head, I saw Arthur. He was walking in the opposite direction along the narrow path that led back to the apartment, the only road home. When our eyes met, he immediately quickened his pace and hurried over to me. After carefully looking me over from head to toe to make sure I was okay, he paused before finally speaking cautiously. Michelle, my mother, she didn't say anything strange to you, did she? I burst out laughing. What? Are you scared I found something out? I had only meant it as a joke. But Arthur suddenly stopped walking, then quietly answered. Yes. His expression became serious. Because I wanted to tell you personally, Michelle, I like you. Even though this place was close to the Arctic Circle, today's weather actually seemed rather beautiful. I gently took his hand and smiled. We had only known each other for 7 days. But then again, even after 7 years together, did people necessarily end up with a happy ending? Softly, I said. Then Mr. Arthur, starting from today, shall we try dating each other? Chapter Extra, Hector. Chapter 1. On the day Hector's father died from late-stage cancer, Michelle got married. Even on his deathbed, the old man still wondered whether Wendy would come back one last time. Just to see him again, Hector sat beside the hospital bed, looking at how emaciated his father had become, and told him to stop dreaming. The old man was gravely ill. His mind had begun to fail him. At times, he seemed to think it was 30 years ago, back when they had first married. He stretched out his scar-covered arm, marked by countless surgeries, and kept calling Wendy's name over and over. Wendy, do you want some cake? Wendy, don't upset mother. Wendy, just come back. All you need to do is lower your head. Then occasionally, he would regain a brief moment of clarity and look at Hector sorrowfully. Hector, call your mother. Tell her this is my final wish before I die. She'll soften eventually. Hector suddenly remembered that morning in Norway, her cold voice saying, Hector, don't call me mom. People who had been hurt too deeply never truly turned back. He lowered his phone and shook his head. Stop dreaming. Do you even know what day it is today? It's the day her stepson is getting married. Almost cruelly, Hector bent down and spoke word by word beside his father's ear. Don't you understand? Compared to me, she always cared more about that son of hers, and now she has a lovable daughter-in-law too. So stop living in your fantasy world. She forgot about us long ago. On a happy day like this, why would she ever think about us? Chapter 2. Hector's father died. Standing outside the hospital, Hector lit a cigarette. If you really thought about it carefully, his father and mother had once genuinely loved each other. So when had everything started changing? It seemed to begin when his father's childhood sweetheart, the woman from the same wealthy social circle he grew up with, returned from overseas. Wendy had never been liked by the older generation of the wealthy family to begin with. They looked down on her identity as a dancer, believing she was too public-facing, too flashy. In daily life, they constantly nitpicked her for no reason, criticizing her in every possible way. And now, even her husband had begun comparing her to the daughter of another powerful business family. Sometimes, when Hector thought back on it, he truly didn't understand how she endured it all. Maybe there really had been something keeping her there, until eventually, even that attachment disappeared. One day, Wendy was practicing dance at home. Hector walked out from the second-floor bedroom. He descended the stairs, still just a small child, yet standing there arrogantly, looking down at his mother with disgust. Can you stop making noise? No wonder everyone says during dinner that dancers, singers, and actors are all low-class people who can't stand proudly in high society. Can you stop embarrassing Dad and me? Chapter 3. Hector often felt that the beliefs of one's parents really could shape a person for life. Even though after his mother left, he regretted everything deeply. When he later got together with Michelle, he still subconsciously looked down on her identity as an actress. And then, the moment Isolde returned, All the buried emotions and unresolved past finally exploded completely. Chapter 4. After Michelle got married, she and Arthur moved to the South City. The movie she had filmed in Norway was successfully released and became a tremendous success. Both its critical reception and box office performance reached unprecedented heights. The following year, she was selected for the 3 major international film festivals, and finally won the very first Best Actress award of her life. The entertainment industry had always worshipped success and trampled failure. These days, Michelle rarely even heard anyone mention Isolde's name anymore, even Hector, because their lives no longer intersected. She almost never thought about him either. Michelle thought her life was ultimately moving forward, until another 7 years passed. Michelle became pregnant and had a child, a lovely little daughter. Their family often traveled together. Sometimes they would bring Wendy and Arthur's father along as well. That same year, Hector happened to be away on a business trip. Halfway through a dinner gathering, someone somehow brought up the entertainment industry. Do you guys know Arthur? The director who's insanely famous right now. I heard his muse is his wife. They're actually in this city too. Apparently they're staying at this hotel. Hector's heart suddenly tightened violently. It had already been many years since he last asked about them. So this must be fate. Fate had somehow allowed them to cross paths here once again. He sat there blankly for a while, then abruptly stood up, pushing his wine glass aside. Under everyone's shocked stares, he strode out of the room. But in reality, he had no idea which floor Michelle was on, or which room. He didn't even know whether what that man said was true. Holding his phone tightly, he wandered aimlessly for a while, until eventually, near a vending machine around the hallway corner, he ran into a nanny caring for a child. The little girl was pressing herself against the glass display, pointing repeatedly at a chocolate bar inside with tiny fingers. I want that one. I want chocolate. The nanny looked troubled. You already had sweets today, my little princess. Madam won't agree to it, okay? The little girl pleaded pitifully. Then she turned around, and Hector realized something. After all these years, not only had he never forgotten Michelle, he could even recognize her child at a single glance. Chapter 5. Hector bought every single chocolate bar inside the vending machine. He was elegantly dressed and carried himself with natural authority, so the nanny didn't dare say anything. The little girl was overjoyed. He asked her softly, "Was your mother happy today?" The 5-year-old nodded enthusiastically. "Of course. We went to see the ocean today, and visited the amusement park, and watched fireworks tonight too. Grandpa accompanied Grandma to the art exhibition she's always dreamed of visiting this afternoon, and Daddy bought Mommy a super pretty pink diamond. And now," she grinned brightly, "I have chocolate too." And finally, Hector understood. This truly was fate, but not fate bringing them back together. Instead, it was fate telling him that after all these long years, he had truly, completely lost her forever.